Good afternoon, everyone. How are you doing today? Good. I'm Darnell Hunt, Director of the Ralph J. Bunn Center for African American Studies, and it's my pleasure to invite you to our continuing author series. And today, we're very excited to have an old friend, an alum, this provocative writer who's written all over the place. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into her bio, but of course, Erin Aubry Kaplan. Today she's going to talk about her new book, Black Talk, Blue Thoughts, and Walking the Color Line, a book that I've heard, many plugs about on KPFK and other radio stations. Every time I cut the radio on, I hear her talking about this book. So we're really privileged and excited to have her here today. The book presents 33 insightful and wide-ranging pieces of literary, cultural, reporting on the contemporary Black American experience. Drawn from the Los Angeles Times, the LA Weekly, Salon.com, and elsewhere, this collection also features major new articles on President Barack Obama, Black and Hispanic conflicts, and clinical depression. In each, Erin Aubry Kaplan argues with meticulous observation, razor-sharp intelligence, and sparkling prose against the trend of Black erasure and for the expansion of horizons of the Black American story. Kaplan is a Los Angeles journalist and columnist who has written about the African American political, economic, and cultural issues since 1992. She is currently a contributing editor to the op-ed section of the Los Angeles Times, and from 2005 to 2007 was a weekly op-ed columnist, the first Black weekly op-ed columnist in the paper's history. She has been a staff writer and columnist for the LA Weekly, New Times Los Angeles. She's a regular contributor for many publications, including Salon.com, Essence, Black Enterprise, Black America Web, Ms., and The Independent. She's also a regular columnist for Makeshift, a quarterly cutting-edge feminist magazine that launched in 2007. Erin Aubry Kaplan.
Oh.
It's right there. It's all yours.
I have to get up. Well, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate this. It's funny. Someone just said the other day, I actually wrote a piece for a journal that is marking the 20th anniversary of the civil unrest, which is the next year. And I had to really think about that because that's exactly how long I've been writing. And I thought, not only was that a long time ago, 20 years, it was like a million political eras ago, where the political agenda was. I think that was the last time we had a big discussion about the problems in the so-called inner city. But anyway, that's just kind of an aside. It's funny, I didn't start, this is a book I didn't really mean to write. I mean, it's a collection of things that developed over the years that I realized had a common thread, and that was sort of me talking about, mostly about being Black, but also about myself. And I guess what I have done in retrospect is combine stories about myself with stories about the community, and sometimes the nation, sometimes the city, sometimes my family, which to me is occurs naturally. It's kind of, I've got some pushback for it. I'll talk about that later, but I'll just tell you a little bit about myself and how I got here, how I became a writer. I am an LA native, as most of you know. I always have to add, I like to know how many people are from LA.
Compton.
Oh, you're not from LA. My father didn't raise his hand. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a writer. I didn't even know. I mean, I read the paper, and that was a tradition, but I didn't have any idea about being a journalist. I wanted to just be a poet. That was a good job, right? Being a poet. And so I wrote, and I was, believe it or not that articulate, didn't say a lot growing up. I was sort of an observer and not much of a talker. And I grew up in I call South Central. I don't like South LA, that's a whole other thing. I think South Central has some historical resonance in it, so I still use it. Over near Century and Van Ness. I later moved to Inglewood. And I went to UCLA, as Darnell mentioned, of course. I went here twice. I graduated in '83 with a degree in English, and then a few years later, in '87, got a degree in theater arts, and thought I might be an actor, but that actually, it struck me that Ellie did not need another actor, and that is a hard, it's a hard road to hoe. I respect actors, I really do. It is a really tough job. You have to have a very thick skin and persistence and all this, none of which I had in great amount. So I went back to the idea of writing, but still wasn't sure how to do it, how to put it in play. But I have to stop and tell a story about UCLA, which really did get me on the path of writing in a way it didn't intend to. In my second year as a graduate student in the MFA program, which I wasn't enjoying all that much, honestly, I was one of 10 acting students, and we had to audition for productions every quarter. That was required. And the other part of the program was academic, and I enjoyed that more, so that gave me a clue. I enjoyed the history seminar, and writing papers, and I was really liked that part more. But in the second year, a professor of mine
It's your sister.
He's giving you a preview. Okay, so the second year, my second year, which was 1986.
Just get off a yoga.
I might not read the piece I actually wrote about. So the second year, at the end of the semester, a professor of my history course called me into his office and said that he had a very serious thing to talk to me about. He said that he held up my paper that I'd written, my term paper, and said, "I cannot grade this. You didn't write this paper." And he just set it down. He looked at me, and I was very surprised. I was 19. I was 20. And I was really quite naive. Believe it or not, yes, I was politically naive. I really thought the system worked. I really felt that I was part of a generation that was in a really elevated place, and that people more or less saw me equally. I mean, I wasn't totally off guard, but I really felt that, by 1986, things had opened up and continued to open up, and that this institution especially was liberal and a place where, where I would be well received. Anyway, so I'm confronted with this professor who tells me very certainly, "You didn't do this. I'm really sorry, but you didn't write this." And I said, my first word was, "I didn't." I didn't get angry. I was really shocked. I said, "But I did. And he just went on just shaking his head sadly, like, "No, I'm afraid, Miss Aubry, you didn't write this paper." And I said, "Yes, I did, though." And finally I said, by the way, it was just a paper. It was on Spanish classical theater. I mean, I had spent many years writing papers as an English major, and I was the only student in the group that had done that. The other students were all previous dance or theater majors, which is fine. Nothing against that. But I was the only non-performance major in the group, the only African American. And he just said, finally I said, "Why don't you think I wrote this paper?" And he said, because I thought he would say, because he was accusing me of plagiarism, which is a pretty serious charge. And he just said, "No, you didn't write it." And this "you" kept getting bigger. The you, he's coming. And he said, "You just don't speak like that." He said, "You don't speak like," he said, "You don't speak like you write. They just don't match." Now that's sort of true, but I was really, again, I was shocked. I wasn't immediately insulted. I just couldn't believe this. This was really assaulting my idea of, 1985, UCLA, things opening. I just couldn't understand what he was saying. And I actually had to go away and think about it. And when I kind of came to my senses, I had to go back and do something I did not want to do, which is to tell this professor he had no basis for accusing me of this, and that I did write the paper. In fact, what he was doing could be construed as racist. And I didn't want to say this. And I'm telling you the story because this is part of being black. This is part of negotiations you make all the time. And as a young person in front of a figure of authority, you really think maybe you've done something wrong here. You don't immediately become angry. So when I told him this, he became very flustered and he said, "Of course that's not me." But he could not really defend his position. So what he did was he gave me an oral quiz on the paper to make sure not only that I had written it, I had written it, but that was my idea. Because what I also realized was that he did not believe that I had thought of it, you know, which is deeper than just having written it. Anyway, it all turned out fine. He had to give me an A because it was that good. Although it would have been nice if he had said, "This is very good," and I can, you know, I can. If he had actually just said that. So even though I won this battle, I felt like I lost something. But what that did for me was to kind of get me on the path of writing. I said, well, I must be so good at it. Like this guy thinks that some other brilliant genius wrote this, but it could have been me, of course. Then maybe there's something there. So I in that way, UCLA helped orient me, or kind of helped me figure out what I probably should have been doing anyway. But it was a very seminal moment that I only, you know, recognized in retrospect. So I graduated from UCLA, wanted to write, but still wasn't sure how to do it. I didn't know anybody in journalism, and I was sort of drifted around. I taught, was no good at that. And fortunately, a friend who was in journalism did appear. This guy, Ed Boyer, who wrote for the LA Times, but he was bored at the LA Times. The LA Times, in his mind, was not writing the kinds of stories that he felt, you know, should be written about the black community. So he started his own paper. Somehow he did this as a staff writer at the Times. He just started his own paper, used a pseudonym, broke all the rules, and recruited me to write for it. And so this was between 88 and 92, 87 and 92. It was we tried to come out every month. Some of you might remember the name of this, those of you who've been around a while. It was called Accent LA. It was a monthly black news magazine. We tried to put it out monthly, didn't always get there. I think we've actually published 30 issues in all the years we've been running. And actually people noticed it. And it gave the LA Sentinel a run for its money when it was around. But then in 1992, something, the civil unrest happened. We were still putting out Accent. Suddenly the LA Times did some soul searching and decided it needed to improve its coverage of the inner city. And it started a new section and it wanted reporters who knew the community. So I actually benefited from this. They actually took me on as a reporter, and I was very excited. I'd gone from a very tiny paper, 3 people working in an apartment, to the LA Times, which is the biggest paper in town. And I was suddenly I had this mission, and it was a kind of a tragic event, of course, but a good thing for me as a writer. Except that the section only lasted 3 years. The 90s, as you recall, this was 92, there was another recession, which seems like a really small one compared to what's going on now. But that was all the Times needed as an excuse to get rid of the section. But actually, the whole decline of paper started back that far, way back in the 90s. So the coverage didn't last. But I was in the system. I started to write, and from there I went to the LA Weekly, which I stayed there as a staff writer for 9 years. And it's really at the LA Weekly where I started to write long pieces, long features, long kind of reflective essays about, not just about what was going on in the community, but what was going on with me and how my thoughts connected to what was going on in the community at large. And I was there until 2007 when something surprising happened. The LA Times called me and wanted me to come to the opinion page as a columnist. And I was really surprised because I just didn't think the stuff I wrote for the Weekly would go over well at the Times. But they asked, and so I couldn't really resist the offer. So I went, and that lasted all the year and 4 months. The papers were still shrinking and cutting, and so I was the first regular black opinion columnist and the last. And so since then, I appear on the page sometimes, but with not a lot of frequency. The opinion page, if you notice, is getting smaller and smaller, and now the Saturday page is 1 page. It used to be 2, and now it's cut in half. And so the irony is, all the space is shrinking in paper, although the internet has limitless space, right? But somehow nobody seems to read the internet enough for these papers to make money. So at this point, it's kind of tough for me to have a regular presence in media, but so I'm glad that this is out, because this is sort of it for now. So anyway, people ask me, you know, why do I write about things like my makeup or the butt or things like that, and also write about larger issues like racism and politics and education. And to me, they're all, you know, of a piece. When I wanted to be a writer when I was younger, I wanted to be a poet. I thought what a writer should always do is just illuminate, you know, kind of take apart thoughts and get to the bottom of things. So for me, that was a natural thing to kind of connect as many dots as I could. But what I realized in doing this was that I was sort of disturbing this narrative, or kind of disturbing a tradition of how we're written about. And most black journalists, you know, if they're good or if they're conscious, you know, they're advocacy journalists. They'll write about issues and causes and you know, and problems and things we need to solve, and that's been going on for as long as I've been alive. And so I think that's very important, and that's how I started writing. I was covering the Crenshaw area in Southwest LA in '92, one of the areas hard hit by the unrest. So I was really, I was passionate about that. But I also started to realize as I was writing about issues and causes and you know, the good things too, not just that stuff, that I was really part of that story. I mean, it's a natural, and so are all of you. I mean, I was interested in how I felt about these things and how other people felt about them, not just what they were doing or the solutions they were proposing or the groups they were organizing, but you know, I wanted to sit and reflect. And where are we? How do people feel about things now? Because as I said, you know, in the 80s, I kind of thought not that problems were over and that racism was dead, but I thought we were sort of kind of permanently getting better. And then I started seeing, no, that's not true. And the older I got, the more I saw the 60s as this real aberration in American history, that all those doors that had opened had not closed, but they weren't opening wider and wider and wider. And I thought that progression would just keep going, and it hasn't. And I think that's other people in my generation, I would say I'm the first generation to have lived completely without Jim Crow. And that's not historically not that long ago, right? I was born in '62. Things were still segregated then, but I didn't experience that. But I grew up with the idea that, you know, the worst days are behind us. And you can argue with me whether that's true or not. But certainly I felt because of kind of the stagnation or the problems that continue to go on with education, with all these other big abstract issues, you know, these affect me personally. I don't think we talk about that too much. You know, it really affects me personally. And I talk to people sometimes, and then people actually say to me, not black people, but some people will actually say to me, well, why do you really care about these people who, you know, you're doing all right, so why should you really, why do you have to talk with these other black folks? And I think that's such a strange question. You know, we're all part of a community, and your own well-being is really defined by your community. But somehow, what Darnell said in the intro is very true. The description of the book, the writing to sort of fight this trend of black erasure, because I think we're all every day, you know, we're someone's trying to convince us that really we don't need each other, that we're not connected to each other, and that, you know, the successful ones among us are, you know, are all who really matter. And that's and I think this message is what I've been trying to counter all this time, whether I'm writing about, you know, education, or writing about my family, or writing about me, or writing about a kid I met at Locke High School, or Bill Cosby. There's a piece in there about him. Bill Cosby and Michael Dyson, that whole fight. That's what I'm trying to counter, is this idea that has gotten stronger and stronger and stronger, that somehow, you know, we don't need to be black anymore. I don't even know what that means. But there's actually a book out called Post-Blackness, which is an idea that's been floating around. Maybe Darnell can explain that later. But and somehow this idea is supposed to be liberating, that we're no longer black, so we can just kind of go and be free. To me, it's the opposite. There's nothing liberating about that. There's something self-destructive about that. So, and again, this trend actually was around when I started writing. I think it's only gotten stronger and stronger as the conservative elements out there have gotten very stronger and more concentrated. We're the first ones they always want to get rid of. And like I said, I kind of wistfully think about 1992 when at least people were thinking about what's going on in black communities. I really don't think we've had a national discussion about that since then. Maybe I'm wrong, but I mean a real focused kind of discussion. And again, as the years went on, I thought, how do people feel about this? You know, it's really hard in a way to be African American because there's so much you have to think about, so much you have to respond to, just on a daily basis. And that those things that happen on a daily basis, those small things that we all experience but don't really talk about, are what really interests me. And so I guess I started writing about myself, even, you know, like I have a big piece in here about going through depression, which I realized in writing it was not something people talk about. It's almost like feeling low is part of our existence. You know, being low, you know, trying to fight upward is so assumed that why talk about how you feel? You know, it doesn't serve a purpose. Well, to me, it does serve a purpose. And I think, at least in this cult of individualism that I've inherited, we all live it. At least as an individual, I can focus the light on other folk. So I think that is, you know, there's something to be said for writing about yourself, not to inflate your ego, although many people do that, but to really examine yourself as part of the group. And that's the best way I can explain why I write and how I write. So, and some of the, you know, the pieces where I think you know, my own personal experience melds with what the wider community experience are pieces like The Butt, which, you know, apparently that piece had a lot of legs. That was a long time ago, and I'm old and I don't really want to talk about that piece anymore. But because, you know, I'll just stop on that one. That was something that seemed like a very trivial sort of matter, you know, but, you know, physical image and how you view the way you look and how you judge yourself, and all that is very tied to, I found, not just women's issues, but also racial issues and how contexts change. You know, you feel one way about yourself physically if you're amongst other black people. If you're in another context, another part of town, you feel a different way. Why is that? So I just kept asking these questions. Why? And I'm still asking those questions. And so that kind of interplay between the really personal and, I guess, the political. And to me, there's really no separation. It's a continuum. It's just a continuum. In that piece, also there's a piece about my experience in '92, April 1992. On that day, it was April 29th, right? Right. Right. So I wrote a piece, an essay about how I tried to go out and do something that day. So it kind of melds my own personal experience with a very you know, well-known experience. And then there's another piece in there called Thoroughly Modern Mammy, which is a piece about how a friend of mine gave me one of those black collectibles. You're all familiar with those, right? And I know it's something we've accepted, but I never was comfortable with those things. And I just kind of write about how I had this, it was a mammy thing, you know, a mammy image, and I could never claim it, quote unquote. And so that's just one, that's another piece that kind of takes the very personal and broadens it into, you know, this whole issue of why do we keep that stuff? What does it do for us? What is it? Is it just commercial? Is it sort of a take back? Is it kind of a, you know, empowering yourself by putting up this really ugly white created image? Should it just go in a museum? Y'all remember Brian Brea used to be over in Lamert Park Museum in Black? Anybody remember that place? Well, his goal was to take all that collectible stuff out of circulation, put it in a museum, because he felt that's where it really belonged. So anyway, that's another piece that I wrote back in the 90s. And there's also a piece, actually the oldest piece in the book is a piece called The East Side Boys, which is a piece about my father's generation. He happens to be here. And this is, as you all know, the whole, you know, the community that grew up on the east side, not East LA, but the east side, which was east of Maine, which was the very black section of town that lasted until about 50s, late 40s, early 50s, when, you know. But I had grown up hearing about, you went to these parties with East Side Boys. I thought it was some kind of car club. I didn't know what it was. So I started asking questions, and I realized it was not a club, it was a whole, it was a generation, it was an experience. And so that led me to doing a story about, not just about the East Side Boys, which included my dad, but about my relationship to it. You know, why don't I have an East Side Boys club? What happened to those links? What happened to that, those connections? What happened to that community? Which is a conversation we're all having now. What happened to that community? And that's another one of those existential questions we can't seem to answer. People talk about the good old days of segregation. I don't think anybody wants to go back to Jim Crow, but somehow we have to reach all the way back there to talk about the good times and the last sustained good time that we had, even though it was under a bad time. That to me is another very interesting paradox that is part of negotiating being black. You know, it's an issue we have not resolved or figured out how to address. So I find all this stuff very rich and not embarrassing or condemning or anything like that, but just real and just part of our humanity that we often don't have time for, you know, because it's still a struggle, right? I don't think anybody would disagree with it. Even the conservatives out there, I don't think they would disagree it's a struggle. They just opt out of it, or they think they do. But we all know there is a struggle going on. And I think that increasingly that is a radical idea, just that idea of it being a struggle for black people. I get resistance from mostly non-black readers who just say, you know, I like this part over here, but don't talk about black people. Well, how do I don't even, you know, that's just, you know, and I always say this, I say, nobody tells a writer like, you know, Philip Roth or Tilly Olson or Luis Rodriguez to, you know, just be a human being. Don't write about being Latino, don't write about being Jewish. You have to write about who and what you are. End of story. I mean, as a writer, as an artist. And so I think, again, what I've noticed is that black people are always sort of told over and over, in order for you to be a full human being, you must not be black. Well, that's a very dangerous message. So that is exactly why I keep putting things in people's faces. I really do it for myself. I'm really talking out loud most of the time. And many, you know, that's my first audience. But if people, you know, don't like what's going on in my head, well, too bad. You're gonna have to listen. So I'm glad people did listen to some degree, and I just hope in some small way to shift the narrative to, you know, into a place that's still unpopular. It's not, you know, it's not, the trend is not changing. But it's funny, of course, one of the new pieces I wrote for the book is about Barack Obama, because you cannot write a book about black anything now without talking about Obama. We are now in the age of Obama, even though we're only 3 years into it, almost 4. I don't know, 5. I don't know. But and of course, Obama complicates the whole narrative, because of course his role in the narrative is that we have a black president. What more do you people want? It's on the one hand, you know, on the surface, it seems like a reasonable argument, but anyone who has been, you know, tracking things over the last 20 years knows that Obama, and this is my big revelation, and I'm giving things away now, but in my Obama essay, I say Obama is this great symbolism. We can't get any higher symbolism, but he's not a symbol of reality. He is, in a way, a product of his own ambition, which is, again, part of, you know, that's the post-civil rights, you know, generation. You know, it was his idea to become president. He created it, he ran it, but he is not an expression of black discontent. It's different than movements that produced leaders before. So, I mean, that's just a distinction, a subtle distinction that we tend not to make, because what we've gotten so far is Obama is, you know, the mountaintop. There's no further to go. So it makes people even less inclined to really examine issues related to black people, because Obama's put a period on it. Now, I'm sure once he gets out of office, he'll tell you exactly. He's not telling us now. So I just want to read a couple of, read a few things from here. I kind of divided all these are 33 pieces, and what I did was I looked at them all and said, how can I actually divide them up? So what I did was, I have a section called Generation I, which, you know, not the I, but, you know, me, I. and the pieces that are most personal, including that piece called The Butt, and one, but also in that section, also the piece on depression called Blue Like Me, on a more serious note. And then I have a section called State of a Nation, which of course includes Barack, and a piece about the whole experience of Katrina, and I call it Losing New Orleans, which is ironic. I'm from here, I'm not from New Orleans, but I really felt in the way that I lost something that I never quite had after Katrina, and I still feel that way. And another section I call, this kind of tongue-in-cheek, I call it starring. I don't do celebrities, like I just in the course of my work, I haven't found too many celebrities interested in the kind of things I'm interested in, but there's a few, and there's a piece that I did about Magic Johnson, you know, when he was trying to build things over in Crenshaw. There's a piece about Serena Williams, who at the time in 2003 was, you know, Serena and Venus were new, just, you know, really new and rocking the tennis scene. And there's another one in there about Randy Newman. People go, huh, Randy Newman? Well, actually, it was, I've actually been a fan of his for reasons that have to do with his music, which I think is actually very sharp social commentary, racial commentary, because he spent some time in New Orleans. That kind of got lost, I think, in his career. And the funny thing is, when I interviewed Randy Newman, we happened to choose the date we chose to interview was September 11, 2001. So it was a very interesting introduction into him and his thinking. I have another section called Stomping Grounds, which is about the city and about place. One is about Inglewood, which is where I spent my adolescence and where I live now. One is also about a guy named Richard Fulton, who used to run a place called Fifth Street Dick's over in Lamert Park, and kind of the rise and fall of that. One of the others, you know, East Side Boys. One I really like, although he didn't think so. He didn't like it. The King of Compton, which is about Omar Bradley. And again, it's, you know, by that point, Omar Bradley was very much in the news when he was mayor of Compton. I mean, too much in the news. And so I wanted, this is the typical, I wanted to write a piece. I wanted to see what was behind all these stories that the Times kept putting out about this clown. It seemed like, you know, a real dangerous character. And I just wanted to go and talk to myself and see what the story was. And he's no longer mayor, for, you know, can't hold office again. But I found just, you know, I went beyond the caricature and really felt that Omar Bradley's kind of madness and his anger at how things were, in some ways, was exactly mine. It's just that he wasn't all that constructive about how he expressed it, or, you know, he had issues for sure. But I really felt like he was, again, a character in this narrative, this bigger narrative of black folk who were trying to make things better for themselves, but also for the community at large. I think most people still have that idea that they would like to make a difference. You know, doing well for yourself never seems to be enough. Maybe it is for some people, but for me it's not. And for him it wasn't. We were very different people, and he scared me, frankly. And he cussed at me, and he did. But in some ways, I thought, you know, we're sort of in the same space. Not for too long, though. So. And then I have one short section called Mothers and Fathers, which is, you know, kind of self-explanatory about my father and also my mother, who always tells me it's not right about her, but anyway. And then I had the section that I call Teach on That. And it's about education, because education is one of those issues that's a very core issue for black people. I mean, for everybody. But, you know, I look back and realize that education, that was the thing that was going to equal, that was the thing that was going to bring equality and equity, you know, and still can. But that was really kind of the fount of hope that didn't quite come together. Not after, you know, after the big integration push, I guess, which would have been the late 70s, and we've really done nothing since then to really concertedly improve education for black kids. In fact, it became a non-issue after that, as you know. But, so, those pieces are all about, in some way or another, about education. And I have to say, I came up with that phrase, teach on that. I had not heard it until my cousin Thais, who's also an alum, and I spent a lot of time with her. She was a graduate student here, I was an undergraduate, and she always punctuated everything she said was to teach on that. And maybe it's, I would associate with her. I'm sure it's just a phrase that other people use, but I kept hearing that in my head, so that's why I call it that. And the postscript, which is a very short section, is about how I met my husband. So it's sort of completely unrelated, but related to the rest of the book. So how much time do I have?
You have time to read.
Oh, I do. Okay, good, good. So I'll read, kind of skip around. Since I feel like I have to start with the butt, so we can get it past it. And by the way, I have to say, when that piece came out in 1998, y'all remember Larry Elder, who was on Kate?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Larry Elder was so angry about this piece. He were on the air, bad talk, bad mouthing me, and who is this woman? What is she talking about? And blah blah. Anyway, I ended up going on his show, and this was one of those things that just happened. I went on the show because he wanted to come down and talk to me about the piece, and so I went down to the station, which is on down in La Cienega, and when I couldn't believe it. We had a decent conversation about the piece. He understood exactly what I was talking about. This is off air.
All right.
Okay. And he said, "Oh, I understand. I understand the metaphor." But he said, "But if I say this," he said, "well, you and I agree on air. There's no show."
Oh, yeah.
Wasn't it right? So I was really. So this was a real insight into how this whole media thing works, right? And how he was just telling me I'm selling out. Even if I agree, I agree with you, but I really, that's part of my shtick. I can't say that, which really disillusioned me. I would have felt better if he believed his shtick. But he's an actor playing a role, which I think does incredible damage for black people, because you're taking up public space, and you're just playing a role. I'm not saying he didn't believe everything he puts out there. However, I think to even do that one time does damage to our narrative. It's false, and just this idea that he can't go there. Wow, I guess it's not profitable. Basically, it gets down to money, right? It always gets down to money. But that was something that I found really educational and disheartening. But anyway, so this is a brief reading from this piece. So, and this is how I put myself into all of these issues. Okay, let's face it. Sexual sophistication is one of those black stereotypes, like dancing prowess, that is not entirely without an upside. It implies a healthy attunement to life, a knowingness. At the same time I was growing acutely butt conscious at 13 or so, I also started recognizing that implicit power in a figure, how it shaped an attitude and informed a simple walk around the block. In sloping my back and elongating my stride, my butt was literally thrusting me into the world, and I sensed that I had better live up to the costume or it would eventually wear me to death. For me, this didn't mean promiscuity at all, but a full blooming of the fact that I stood out, that I made a statement that might begin with my body, but that also included budding literary proclivities, powers of observation, silent crushes on boys sitting 2 rows over. Which is never to say, that my shifting center of gravity wasn't cause for alarm. I started a lifelong pattern of vacillating between repulsion and satisfaction. My butt branded me, but it also made me more womanly, not to mention more identifiably black. I may have spoken properly and been a shade too light for comfort, but my butt confirmed for all my true ethnic identity. As one of those physical characteristics of black people that tend to differ measurably from whites, like hair texture and skin color, the butt demarcates, but also, in the context of history of racial oppression, stands as an object of ridicule. Yet, unlike hair and skin, the butt is stubborn, immutable. It can't be hot combed or straightened or bleached into submission. It does not assimilate. It never took a slave name. Accentuating a butt is like thumbing a nose at the establishment, like subverting a pinstripe suit with waist-length dreadlocks. And the butt's blatantly sexual nature makes it seem that much more belligerent in its refusal to go away, to lie down and play dead. About the only thing we can do is cover it up. But even those attempts can inadvertently showcase the butt by imparting a certain intrigue of the unseen. What is that thing sticking out of the back of her jacket? It was tricky, but I absorbed the better aspects of the butt stereotypes, especially the Tootsie Roll walk, the wave, the undulation in spite of itself, the leisurely antithesis of the spring in the step. I liked the walk and how it defied that silly runway gait, with the hips thrust too far forward and the arms dangling back in empty air. That is a pure stand-up apology for butts, a literal bending over backwards to admonish the body for any bit of unruliness. having a butt is more than unruly, it's immoral. The modern day equivalent of a woman eating a ding dong in public. And then another piece I mentioned, kind of along the same lines of body image and what it means. Because also, you know, a big thing, one of the things I wrote about a lot was how image, you know, we still battle image in a way other people do not. You know, one wrong step, one image that's read wrong, and everybody suffers. This is not true of other groups. It's just not. So we kind of vacillate between the postmodern thing of it's just it means nothing too. It means everything. And so, you know, it's kind of hard sometimes to know how to assess these things. So this is actually a piece written back in 2002 called "The Empress's New Clothes" about Serena Williams, and you know she wears interesting outfits. And it caused a real ruckus when she, you know, now it's routine. But back in 2002, which was almost 10 years ago, it was very different. So this is on page 103. Okay. So what in the world are we to do with a girl who gets out in front of our fears so often, and who actually has the right to do so because she's number one? By the way, she's wearing a cat suit. I don't know if you remember this outfit.
Yes.
Okay, that's all I'll say, cat suit. Serena, as the top female tennis player in the world, changes everything. Both she and her sister Venus belong to an unquestionably new breed. Neither woman is the symbol of black resistance that their predecessor Arthur Ashe automatically was. As champions in the Tiger Woods era, they do not protest so much as prescribe. They expect, perhaps naively, though rightfully, to be taken merely as themselves and to set the trend rather than counter it simply by occupying the positions never before occupied by blacks. But they know full well that black girls from Compton don't exactly conjure up images of success in the pro-tennis monde, which is still a bastion of the American elite. They know that beads and blonde braids and frank self-approval only increase the paradox. This might be Lil' Kim or Foxy Brown, but not the reigning tennis queens whom we imagine, at the very least, as having sprung from college tours and suburban sensibilities. In the last generation, we have all firmly separated good blacks from bad with a sort of hip-hop color line, and Serena and Venus routinely defy it. They're hood rats who speak like valley girls, haute couture enthusiasts who refuse to straighten their hair, but see nothing overtly political about it. They have plenty of attitude on the court, but none of the sullenness or dreaded chips on the shoulder we associate with black Americans in general, and with black athletes in particular. To the contrary, Serena and Venus are among the most emotionally open players on the circuit, giggly when they win, gloomy when they lose, entirely willing to answer questions from the press, even those with clear racial overtones that have me wishing they'd scare up some of that Compton trash talk, if only for a minute. But no, when a reporter asked Serena earlier this year if she felt she was worth all the bank she was making, Serena said, "Yes, of course I do," and moved on. I would have stopped and lectured the guy, but maybe Serena's unruffledness, spiritual and sartorial, works better. Looking good on her own terms is clearly her best revenge, or the best answer to those who may be terminally uneasy about her high profile. The good news is that Serena appears not to give a damn. She's no crusader, but neither is she looking to calm nerves or to prove that she's really just like Martina Hingis or Monica Seles. She prefers to prove emphatically that she's not. But like a lot of young women still shifting from adolescent to adult, Serena has a lot of little girl left. Her catsuit is in your face, yes, but it also speaks to an eagerness to don that new red Sunday dress and parade it around for public affirmation of what she already knows. It looks cute. When Serena explained to the press that her catsuit, quote, makes me run faster and jump higher and it's really sexy, the superwoman analogy sounded less aggressive and adorable, a refreshing bit of youthful hyperbole in an age when everybody grows up way too fast and black kids from inner cities are assumed to have no childhoods at all. That Serena was sporting Harry Winston jewels, a tiara, and pink tennis shoes, along with the catsuit, further evidence the giddiness that was lost in all the stern musings about the black spandex that always seem to get lost whenever she's written about in any detail. At least the Williams sisters force the issue in their unstudied way, often tagging their comments about their own appearance with truth or dare questions like, wasn't that fabulous? Don't I look good? Ladies and gentlemen, say no at your own risk. Kind of switching, shifting gears, I want to read just a little from a piece I mentioned, which is in the Stomping Ground section, the East Side Boys. And in this section, I interviewed many of them. I started with my dad, but there were others who are still around. And one of these guys, his name is Billy Benfield. Is he still?
No, he's gone.
He died. Wow, this was back in '96, and so this is just one interview of many I did about these guys, and about how I'm trying to, kind of fit into this history. Okay, come in, Billy Benfield exclaims before I can get my name out. Billy lives on a street that slopes up to affluent Baldwin Hills, a pipe dream in East Side days. His apartment is old and rambling, with a palm tree shaded balcony that affords a grand view of the Crenshaw district. He unlatches the screen door, takes my hand and pumps it. He laughs and gives me a hug. His gaiety is infectious. While I sit and listen to scratchy jazz playing on the radio, he brings out the photo albums and scrapbooks detailing his glory days as a track star at Jefferson High. Jeff was the East Side School, the East Side High School, known for its champion athletes and innovative jazz instruction. Thanks to music teacher Samuel Brown, the school produced such luminaries as Dexter Gordon, O.C. Smith, Ernie Andrews, Frank Morgan, and Teddy Edwards. Along with church, school was the most important social center of the East Side. If you brought somebody home to meet your folks, they immediately wanted to know your affiliation to those two institutions. And if they didn't belong to no church, remarked Hal, then the old folks would say, well, you just better go on and take this boy back to where you found him. East Siders did go to other schools besides Jeff, L.A., Polytechnic, Jordan, Fremont, but they were outside the proper boundaries, Virgin West Side turf. East Side boys know Billy Benfield, or know what he did. Oh, Billy, said Corky Gaines when I mentioned him. Oh yeah, he ran track. The school had championship track teams for 20 years beginning in the 30s, and Billy was the distance runner on Jefferson's city championship team of 1939. High school sports were regularly covered by the Sentinel and the Eagle, but that year was magic. I got my picture in the LA Times, said Billy, pointing to the yellow clipping with unabashed pride. Can you imagine? That Billy grew up poor on the East Side seems to have fueled rather than dimmed his natural optimism. He and his mother rented an apartment at Stanford 32nd Street for $5 a month. His mother worked days as a domestic. Billy sold papers along Central Avenue or carried grocery bags to people's cars for spare change. He was broke a lot. He sometimes ate dinner at the homes of such prominent East Side gentry as the Houstons. Norman Houston founded the Gold State Mutual Life Insurance business, now at Western and Adams. The East Side boys had a real cohesive thing, but we figured that's how it was everywhere, says Billy with a shrug. Jefferson and the track team were Billy's finest hour. He has since worked as an electrician, pipe fitter, and real estate maintenance inspector, retiring 7 years ago from the city housing department. His beat covered much of his old neighborhood. Next to the East Side, Billy is happiest talking about his 39-year-old son, Benny, and his grandson. Billy's been divorced a long time and went through several periods when he didn't have much money. We get a loaf of bread some afternoons and sneak into a football game at the Coliseum, UCLA games. He didn't mind. We got closer. Later on, when he grew up, he took me to the ball games. Billy has high hopes for a new hot sauce business that he started last year with Benny. The East Side boys have helped get it off the ground. At the 1994 reunion, they bought cases of the stuff to put on 300 tables. Billy can't understand why I'm not married, a bright, promising girl with the blood of the East Side running in my veins. Why, he says, men out there must be crazy. He walks me to the door. I take a mental picture of him in his baseball cap, blue corduroy shorts, and sneakers. Billy is still turning the East Side over in his mind. We didn't realize what we had at the time, so we didn't know what we would miss. I take my son through the East Side sometimes, he says, but all I can do is tell him about it. Is that enough?
Question? Maybe we should open for questions.
Oh, yes, please. Yes, that is enough. Thank you. Questions, comments? Yes.
You know, one of the things that motivated me to come today was the piece on Blue Thoughts.
Oh, yeah.
You know, being a product of corporate America, we hold a lot of stuff in every single day. And, you know, unless you have an outlet to let it out, it just stays there. Mm-hmm. And it ferments, it rots, it whatever. But reading stuff like this helps us confront it and not feel strange about it. And the fact that, you know, if you're someone out there that's, you know, trying to understand the world you live in, and a lot of it doesn't make sense, the way you respond to it doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong with you.
Right. That's very well put. Let's talk about the piece Blue Like Me, which is about depression and how just, you know, how it's impacted by, like you say, you know, living a corporate life or just living under the pressures of America. And I appreciate that, and that's what I was trying to explore.
Well, and the second piece is the physical attributes. As black males, I think everybody in this room knows what that's all about for us. And me going to Loyola High School, all boys high school, freshman locker room, and everybody was kind of like waiting to see for me. And it was kind of strange. It's not like what some say, it was kind of strange. So I identify with that also.
Oh, interesting. Wow. Thank you.
So Erin, I'm just curious.
Yes, Darnell.
What's your favorite piece? I mean, what's the piece that speaks most to you, the one you feel most passionate about
Oh.
in the book? I mean, do you have a favorite?
I love all my kids.
You live
You know
among
what? You know,
multiple-
I don't. You know, I don't really have an answer to that. I will say one thing, because I had to read this whole thing, you know, before it went to print, and I did notice that the pieces written in the '90s seem, you know, were a lot. Well, the pieces I wrote most recently, a lot more somber in some ways than the pieces I wrote. I guess you just get old, right? But there's not that I don't have a positive outlook, or I don't have any hope for the future. But I really I hear myself kind of toned down, or just more sober. Not toned down. It sounds like I don't have an edge, but just kind of the tenor is different. I guess, I don't actually. No, I would say, because you know, reading some of these, I really forgot about some of them, and I really liked some of the ones I'd forgotten about. I think there's one called Lost Soul, which I wrote back in '98, and this was back when I started writing about the whole demographic shift that started happening in LA from Latino to Black, but it really wasn't so much about the Latino thing as it was about what that meant for us in the whole sense of community, which doesn't get discussed still. It's still kind of, the story is still just about how blacks and browns are getting along. But I actually like that. I've forgotten that I liked it. Because in journalism, you know, you write something, you publish it, you move on. It's very ephemeral in a way. And so when I reread it, I was happy to hear that it was still resonant. And I was convinced by, you know, what I'd read, read, and that's a piece I totally forgot about. I would not have even thought about it anymore had I not had to put it in a book. So Lost Soul is one, and I like the East Side Boys. I like the piece I wrote of Dick Fulton, called Rags to Riches. But so I'll stop at 3. Yes. Hi, Denise.
I'd like to make a comment. It's an observation that I've been able to make due to a very unique phenomenon that's occurring in our lives right now because of the advent of Facebook.
Oh, yeah.
As far as neighborhood and community is concerned, the East Side Boys experience is not truly lost in some of the neighborhoods that we grew up in. Like I grew up in a neighborhood called the Fives, which is 135th to Rosecrans, Maine to Avalon. And then there's another neighborhood that's south of there that's 157th called the Zone. And another one in Gardena. But because of Facebook, we have come to realize that there are many of us that still live in our old neighborhoods who are either inhabiting the homes that they grew up in, or they bought homes in those neighborhoods, and there are generations going back to the 40s. I learned that my neighborhood had been bused to our high school, Gardena, since the 40s, before busing was, and so there are like 3 and 4 generations that are still, and they have community and scholarship kinds of things that they do to keep it cohesive, to try to hold on to that most precious thing that is so necessary and so fleeting in our communities. And so I just wanted to breathe a breath of hope into that, to say that there is a sense of community that is being kept alive, although in pockets, not like it once was, but it's very vibrant and vital. And
miracle of Facebook, that's my next story.
yeah, I mean, I have something like 900 Facebook friends, and I guarantee you half of them are people that I either grew up with or their descendants, you know, and it's amazing. It's just, it's mind blowing. So we don't have to wait till we get to the old folks' home to commiserate about it.
Yeah, I agree on Facebook friends. But it's just not the same thing as friends. You know, I'm still adapting to Facebook, but that's really interesting. Yeah, we went to high school together. Yeah. Oh, well, yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
If I could ask this of any historian, there's probably a bunch of them in the room, but I have an opportunity now. I keep wanting to write. I'm from Compton, as I said, and I keep wanting to write about my, you know, about sort of the mixture of your own autobiographical, but it sort of as it interacts with what was happening. So in some ways, it's not just about yourself, but it's about the people, you know, what was happening and the other people that were also there with you.
Yeah.
And it just feels like it has to, like a baby, and you're pregnant, and it needs to come out, and you're struggling to do it. But then there's all these things that sort of, the little gremlins that, you know, whisper in your ear that create problems for you. One of the gremlins is that the past doesn't matter. You know, it comes from out of this sort of yogic thing that says live in the present.
Yoga, I don't do that.
Da, 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 da. And so this little gremlins will say, oh, you know, that's the past.
Who's telling you that, or that's just
No,
some
something
voice
in your head, you know.
Well, this is what I was arguing against earlier. First of all, writers have, without a past, there'd be no artists at all. There'd be nobody putting down anything. You can't write about the future. You don't know what it is. So, I don't know about that gremlin.
Yeah.
I think you said to yourself permission to do it, and I think, I mean, I grew up hearing a lot of really rich family stories, but in some ways people didn't elevate the past. They just kind of just stuff they talked about, and so people didn't necessarily, you know, didn't say, let me tell you this story, and you shall remember it forever. You know, I just kind of listened and heard and was fascinated by it, but I don't know about other families, but that's how it was in my family. So there's certain things they would rather forget, I guess, but you gotta bring out the history. I don't know what else there is in terms of material. Even something that happened yesterday, you have to call it past.
I mean, a lot of times we talk about slavery, or we talk about this, you know, long periods, and, you know, but there's some, I worked here for a while as a counselor, and so I had access to students who would come to me, and the interesting thing was, this was like the late 80s, early 90s, interesting thing was I'd have these kids whose parents were in the movement. They were in the Nation of Islam, they were, you know, and they were taking African American Studies classes because their parents had not told them anything. And yet they could feel like some type of energy, you know, but their parents probably were not able to articulate it. You know, they were in the net, their friends were killed or whatever, and they said, I just gotta find out what. So it's a little period of time, like say when, you know, the 70s, the 80s, the 60s, whatever, that, you know, I guess that's, you know, your history, my history, our history, that the only way it's going to come out is like if we talk about it, I guess.
Well, you bring up a really interesting point, because I think, even though we know our history, we're not taught, again, to elevate it, or to think of it as important, or sometimes it's painful.
Yeah.
You know, my father can speak to this more, but, you know, like, I would imagine, you know, I was spared the South. I didn't grow up in New Orleans. I didn't know what Jim Crow was like. But there's some of that stuff you don't necessarily want to tell your kids about, because what are you actually telling them? I mean, you know, I wasn't explicitly told when you go out into the world or somewhere like UCLA, you might encounter racism. Nobody said that in so many words. I just, you know, because nobody wants that to happen again. Nobody wants to perpetuate it. So I think there's some ambivalence about passing on that history. Not that it's not important, not that it's not valuable, but I think people sometimes don't know what to do with it. Is it going to help? Well, I don't really care about. I don't really. That's not. I don't. You know, discriminate. I mean, I think all past is worth bringing up. It's worth illuminating. For, you know, it's kind of. It's like when you go in archaeological dig and you find things. Everything you find is valuable, and so I see it all as valuable. People don't necessarily want to talk about it. Particularly, again, it gets back to the image thing. How's it going to look for us if we talk about this thing or this incident or this thing? You know, these are things that are not just personally painful, but we think of it, you know, as maybe not being helpful. because we're still trying to evolve, still struggling. So it's not like the history's over, you can turn around, look at it, and talk about it like it's old history, because it's not. It's actually still going on. It's not, in fact, the past is still being made, you know. We're not there yet. I did this column for the Times once called, "Are We Here Yet?" And it was talking about how you know, with all of the, it was during the time when there were all these pro-immigration marches and Latino power was really, you know, political power was really developing. And my question in the column was, we haven't gotten here, we're not here. We don't have, you know, we're still sort of in limbo in a way. So anyway, to your question, I think that try to get that gremlin off your shoulder, out of your ear. Yeah.
This is a comment, but I'm going to ask a question. But to your point, Donna, and your point, you know what Faulkner said the past is not dead, it's not even past.
It's not even past.
It's not even past, so, you know, that's, and
He's right about one
I'm a history
thing.
major, so, you know, it's very important.
Yeah.
Do you have in your, maybe it's not, according to you, but maybe it is, I was reading something, American journalism, and they were talking about a guy they considered an article anyway, really good media critic. Do you look at other journalists who have someone that you can elevate, or someone who's writing in a cultural vein, or what are your heroes or
in journalism?
Heroines? Yeah.
You know, that's a good question.
Particularly black ones,
For sure.
narrowing down.
For a while, this was back in the 90s, I really liked, I discovered the long piece that Henry Louis Gates was writing for the New Yorker. Like, when they used to let you write 20,000 words or something. That doesn't happen anymore.
He needs that.
Yeah.
At least that.
Yeah. We'll leave aside the other parts of Henry Louis Gates, but some of his features I thought really captured me. Just the fact he was able to write 20,000 words on Anatole Royard, a writer that I had not even heard of, that I should have heard of, but I didn't know. I found really important and valuable. You know, my friend Ed Boyer, who wrote for the Times, did some important stuff. He did, you know, about the Geronimo Pratt case and things that, you know, were not mainstream, you know, not considered all that important to mainstream. But in terms of, I'm a big fan of Ida Wells. I mean, for her activism and for, I mean, that's true advocacy journalism. That I mean, you know what she did? She actually would go to the scenes of lynchings and report on it when no one would, you know, a woman at that time, you know, in the 19th century, was just kind of amazing. The funny thing about Ida Wells, though, was that she started many groups and was kicked out of all of them. She, which is another part of her life that I found really interesting. She could not